Third, the images that were created by gossip, rumors, half knowledge, bits of information that were circulated at the time. As immediately after the war, of course, most people claimed that they didn't know anything that had happened in the camps, let alone about the crimes that had happened there. But at the same time, there must have been a great deal of awareness what had been going on inside the camps, and also the many faceted, manifold relationships between the camps and surrounding area. Although after the initial period where the camps needed a lot of material support from local companies, they tried to achieve some kind of self-sufficiency afterwards, even build up their own companies. But then later on, especially during the war, with the extensive use of inmate labor as forced labor, contacts grew enormously between the camps and the surrounding areas. Then, of course, the important aspect that on the one hand, there was a certain kind of secrecy, especially from as far as Germany proper is concerned, secrecy about what was going on in the camps from the late 1930s and especially during the war. But at the same time, Nazi authorities and the camp leadership also try to disseminate a few pieces of information to, on the one hand, deter dissent or even resistance, and also trying to create some sort of impression of what these camps were about. Especially in the early days, it seemed as if the camps were a kind of what now in times of Corona we would call the new normal. The new normal of the dictatorship was the presence of concentration camps in the early 30s in Nazi Germany. And so those three aspects, knowledge, relationships, images, that's what we would try to focus on. And that should be it from my side for now. One thing I should also mention, this online panel discussion is not only a great opportunity to talk about these things, it is also the first of three online discussion events from the project, the Serbian projects, Mapping the Holocaust, Preservation of the Topovske Šupe camp location. This project is led by Milovan Pisari, and he will also be our first presenter for tonight. I may briefly introduce him. He's historian, director of the Center for Public History in Belgrade, and his main fields of interest are the Holocaust, genocide against Roma in Serbia, history of anti-fascism and culture of remembrance. He's currently holding a scholarship from the Gerda Henkel Foundation for the project Everyday Life in Belgrade During the Holocaust, Bystanders and Mass Violence. And his topic for tonight are two camps, actually, or two campsites, Sajmište and Topovske Šupe, campsites and the city. Over to you, Milovan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity to have a discussion with you and with all the other speakers. As you said, yes, this is also, my presentation is also part of the project we launched last year, thanks to the support of different organizations, among them the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. We launched this project because we decided that we wanted to do something in order to protect this location where a camp for Jews and Roma was active between August and November 41. The location today is abandoned, and probably next year, or I don't know when, but there is the possibility that the location will be the buildings will be destroyed, and a shopping mall will be instead of the buildings will be built. So one of the reasons why we launched this project is that we want to protect the location. The other reason is that it's unbelievable how in today Belgrade nobody knows about the history of the camp. and about the location. For the reason, I decided for this evening to present you through 10 photographs where the camp was, and also to talk about another camp that is Saimiste. Why about I decided to talk about Saimiste and Topovske Šupe? Because these two camps were the places where the Jewish population from Belgrade was destroyed between 41 and 42. Belgrade at that time had about 300,000 inhabitants and about 12,000 Jews, and more than 85% of them were killed. Now I will share with you this my short presentation, actually these pictures. First of all, Belgrade, the city of Belgrade. As you can see, Belgrade was, yes, an important city, the capital of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and as I told you, as I said, it had about 300,000 inhabitants. This is the first location I will talk about, is the camp of Topovske Šupe. As you can see, the camp was inside of the city, let's say in a very high populated part of the city. The second camp is Saimiste, and Saimiste was located in front of the old part of the city. It means that immediately we can conclude that the inhabitants, citizens of Belgrade, they knew that there were two camps, and that the inmates were the Jewish population from Belgrade. This is I'm sorry for the quality of the image, but it's the detail from a photo taken in 1944. It's during the bombing of Belgrade, and this is the location of the Topovske Šupe. The Topovske Šupe was actually, Nazi authorities in Belgrade, they decided to use the barracks of the former army of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and they decided to use them for the Jews from the region of Banat and from Belgrade. I'm talking about the male population. About 5,000 Jews passed through the camp, and they were all killed during the retaliations in September, October, and November 41 in the locations around Belgrade. Also, about 1,500 Roma from the city of Belgrade, as well as the Jews, male Roma, were arrested, and they were all killed too in this location. We don't have many information about the camp. Together with Christian and Sanela, we did research in Serbia and also in the German archives. We don't have, unfortunately, many information, and for this reason, we also decided to focus on the surrounding and on the relationship between the camp and the surroundings. So, for example, you can see in this photograph on this left side a stadium. It was a stadium of the most important football club from Belgrade, and we know by reading the newspapers of that period that the camp was the stadium where was used. It means that every week people from Belgrade, they went to the stadium and they watched football games, and probably they passed. They walked close to the camp. At the same time, we know that the life around the camp, let's say, was going on in a more or less normal way. I'll show you another picture. This is the place, the same place for another perspective. This picture is taken before the war, but I think that the situation, the situation in 41 was very, very similar to these photos. These pictures is taken here. It means this is this place. On the right side, you can see the fence of the barracks, and here you can see, for example, a tram. And by reading documents and newspapers, we know that also during the autumn 41, it means when the camp was active, that, for example, people use the tram for going to work, or I don't know, to the center of Belgrade. And we know that this street was also used. And we know, for example, that the inmates, the Jewish inmates and Roma, they had the opportunity to go to the fence and to receive food from their families. It means that everyone from the street was able to see what was going on inside the camp, and of course also the condition of the inmates. This is a picture taken in 1941 after the stadium was rebuilt. But it's important because we can have, from another perspective, we can see where the camp was located. And you can see that also all around the camp there was, you know, a lot of buildings, houses, and so on. Quite similar was the situation concerning the Saimiste camp. The Nazi forces decided to use the already existing buildings of the former fair of Belgrade, and the fair was situated in front of the city, as you can see here, in front of the old city, of the center of the city. It means that also in this case, the Belgrade population from Belgrade, they could see what was going on in the camp. This is also confirmed by documents and by also newspapers. For example, by reading the newspapers, we know that persons from Belgrade also in January and February 42, it means when the Jewish female population as well as children, they were in the camp and they were dying every day because of starvation and cold and so on. We know that at the same time, the population from Belgrade could go to Zemun. It means on this left, on the left, to another city to buy food. And by reading the newspapers, we know that they use this street immediately near to the camp. So it was, a high number of persons walked every day close to the camp. From another perspective, also I'm sorry for the quality, but this is also the perspective of the inmates. For example, we know that they were in these these big pavilions, the so-called Yugoslav pavilions, were used for the inmates. And by reading the letters of the inmates, we know that, for example, they every day they could see the so-called, let's say, the normal, more or less normal life in Belgrade on the other side of the Sava River. This is also important when we talk, for example, about another camp that was established in October in the summer 42, close to the Saimiste camp. It was a camp for forced laborers, and was also situated in front of the city. In this picture, you can see the inmates of the camp, but I think that it is also important to see the you can see also the other side of the Sava River, the Kalemegdan fortress, that was one of the most important places, and still is today one of the most important place for free time and so on. So basically, the inmates could see what was going on in Belgrade, and the population of Belgrade could see what was going on in the camp. This is the last picture. Is also taking a picture of the bombing in 1944. But as you can see here, this is the center of Belgrade. This is the camp for forced laborers, and this is Saimiste. Saimiste was active for the Jewish population from December 41 to May 42, but it's after this period, from May 42 to June 44, it was a camp also for prisoners of war, for forced laborers, and for and many other inmates. So, concluding this brief presentation, I think that it's very important to stress that in Belgrade, the local Jewish population was arrested and interned in camps inside of the city of Belgrade. They were killed in location around the camp, but at the same time, everybody knew that what was going on, and also because his testimony. I mean, we have documents confirming this. In my opinion, I think that the case of Belgrade could be and must be a case study also for many other similar situations in Europe. And this is the reason why, in my personal research, I'm trying to focus on the bystanders, because the bystander perspective is completely forgotten, not only immediately after the war, but still today. And this is important to have this kind of approach also, because when we, for example, organize visits, guided visits to the Zeimisch and to Doppelschule, also for school, we have to stress that it's very different from what they are used to read in their textbooks, because they read, for example, about Auschwitz, about other camps that was located outside of the cities. In the case of Belgrade, we have to stress that the camps were part of the city, and we have to think about this issue, because we have to think also that it was like a kind of, let's say, normal situation in Belgrade from 41 to 44 to have these two camps active in the heart of the city.
Nein.
Thank you.
Jackie, du musst da, sonst hört man doch alles, was hier drin ist.
Okay. Thank you, Milovan, for the presentation. I think we move on to our next presenter, which will be Dirk Riedel. Dirk Riedel is historian, and he started to focus on the history of Nazi concentration camps while he was working at our memorial site in Dachau. I still here and there stumble upon the work that he did here. And he has ever since moved on to the Documentation Center for the History of National Socialism in Munich, and he also teaches at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. And his fields of interest, other than the history of concentration camp, is in general history of National Socialism and its aftermath, and also present-day right-wing extremism. Dirk, over to you.
Thank you for the invitation. For me, it's a very special situation to talk about Dachau again, as I've really been working for a long time there. The historian Harold Marcuse researched the different approaches how the town of Dachau after 1945 dealt with legacies of the former concentration camp. The post-war mayor, Josef Schwalber, for instance, spread the myth of the two Dachaus. He was talking about the bad Dachau of Nazi terror and the concentration camp, which was commanded by external leaders of the SS, and the good Dachau, a picturesque town known for its painters from the end of the 19th century. In Schwalber's fantasy, this real Dachau itself was a victim of Nazi terror. So let me add 2 points here. First, you will find a similar argumentation in many German or even European towns. But the situation in Dachau with the concentration camp right on their doorstep still is a really striking example for the externalization of historical responsibility. And second, which is quite obvious, however must be said, Schwalber's idea of the two Dachaus was wrong, of course. In their invitation for today's discussion, the Dachau Memorial Site mentioned the contacts between concentration camp and the town. This is a proven fact, and I would even go further and speak about a close connection between the camp and its environment. The historian Sibylle Steinbacher found in her research various dimensions of this neighborhood between the camp and the town. I will not have the time to speak about all these dimensions, but at least I would like to mention some examples, especially from the pre-war years of Dachau concentration camp. And I think it is important to amend that the relationship between the concentration camp and its surrounding goes far beyond the boundaries of Dachau, especially the close connection between Munich and the camp should not be underestimated. In fact, Munich played an important role already when Dachau concentration camp was opened on March the 22nd, 1933. And here I would like to show a presentation to you. Hope you can see. Yes, it was Himmler, the Reichsführer SS, and at the same time the acting police president in Munich, who gave the order to build the camp in Dachau. His decision was not a clandestine act. No, 2 days before the opening of the concentration camp, Himmler invited representatives of the press to the police headquarters in Munich. At the following day, the newspapers reported, and that's what you can see here in the presentation, that Himmler had explained that the purpose of the camp should be, I quote, to concentrate all communist and, as far as necessary, Reichsbanner and social democratic functionaries who endanger the safety of the state. So, Dachau concentration camp was not a secret to the people living in Dachau or Munich. The public was informed, and public had an idea about the purposes of the concentration camp. But let's have a closer look at the camp itself. And I have a picture for you then. Why did Himmler choose Dachau, and where in Dachau was the camp located? To begin with the second question first. The concentration camp was situated at the outskirts of Dachau. But this does not mean that it was hidden somewhere in the woods. No, the site was developed and well known in the town, as it was a former ammunition factory which had to be closed down after Germany had lost World War I. So here you see an aerial photograph of the original ammunition factory. This turned out to be a win-win situation for both the SS and the officials of the town. The SS, and here we have the reason why Himmler chose Dachau as site for the concentration camp, took over the factory's infrastructure and placed the prisoners in 10 wooden barracks. These are here. In 10 wooden barracks, which originally were occupied by factory workers. The town officials, on the other side, had been struggling with great economical and social problems since the ammunition factory was closed down in 1918. The unemployment in Dachau was extremely high. So now in 1933, the township hoped that the completion of the concentration camp would provide new jobs. Once established, Dachau concentration camp turned out to be a central prison and site of terror. Not only for the political opposition, but for all men who did not meet with the Nazi regime's idea of a homogeneous German national community. So Volksgemeinschaft is the original expression the Nazis used. The numbers of prisoners remained constantly around 2,000 persons, but was increasing rapidly. And you can see here, these are the numbers of prisoners. Of course, only the average number, and as it is estimated for each year. So the number of prisoners was increasing rapidly after 1936. There are two reasons. One, because of the SS plans to enlarge the camp in preparation of the Second World War. And second, because the Bavarian political police systematized their instruments of persecution and terror after Himmler had received Hitler's agreement that the concentration camp should be maintained and developed to a permanent institution. These decisions had also a strong impact on the relationship between the concentration camp and its surrounding. Parallel to the extension of the camp, the SS constructed new roads because the SS wanted to avoid that the buses and lorries, which were taking prisoners from Munich to Dachau, were driving through the city center of Dachau. One of these new roads was called Camp Road. Today, this is one of the busiest streets in Dachau, the so-called Theodor-Heuss-Straße. The road was constructed by prisoners of the concentration camp. These forced laborers were guarded by SS men. And to avoid any accidents, the SS warned the residents of Dachau to keep in distance to the labor squads, as the SS men were armed and instructed to shoot if prisoners tried to escape. The prisoners were also forced to build a SS residential estate with apartments, a bakery, general store. Just a second, here it is. Sorry. Do you still see the presentation? I hope it's okay. So, sorry. With apartments, a bakery, general store, inn and post office. Even a community house with various rooms for social events was founded. The estate was in direct vicinity of the concentration camp. It was marked in maps of the town and accessible to the public. There's a publication by Sibylle Steinbacher, and in the end of her book, she even has the map of the town of Dachau. And you see the concentration camp isn't mentioned in the map, but this SS residential estate here with Theodor Eicke-Platz, this is how it was named. So everyone could know about it, which means the shops and other facilities were not exclusively built for the SS men and their families only, but could be frequented by other citizens from Dachau as well. Following an SS initiative, the Dachau town authorities even set up a bus line between the railway station and the SS residential estate. Here you see the timetable of the buses running. With the increasing number of prisoners and the enlargement of the concentration camp, rose also the number of SS personnel. In 1936, there were all in all about 4,000 to 5,000 SS men stationed in Dachau. This number had its impact, of course, for a town with a resident population of around 8,000. Typical day-to-day conflicts, as well as several marriages, testify the close relation that developed between the SS men and the Dachau locals. Dachau concentration camp was enlarged and the camp's administration was reorganized between 1936 and 1938. Here we've got an aerial view from 1944, but you see the new camp, the enlarged camp, of course, with more buildings than in 1938, but the prisoners' camp here is that which was built up in 1937-38. These measures also affected the relationship to the surrounding. Although the SS sought to keep the camp as autonomous as possible, the camp personnel had to turn to the municipal authorities in several cases. Questions of civil registration, taxes, building permissions, water supply, electrification, to name only a few cases which usually concern the responsibility of a municipal administration. And here's an interesting point now, as we get to the question, which community was responsible for the concentration camp? As I mentioned before, the camp was built at the outskirts of Dachau. In fact, it spread across several municipal districts, parts of it belonging to Dachau, other parts belonging to smaller villages nearby, Augustenfeld, Etzenhausen, Hebertshausen, Prittelbach, which means the SS had to turn to different municipal administrations according to the specific part of the camp that was concerned in a particular case. Dachau's camp commandant in that time, 1937-38, was Hans Loritz. He wanted to reduce the bureaucracy, which is why he suggested in 1937 to incorporate the complete camp into one of the 4 communities. Dachau's mayor, Hans Kramer, responded immediately and proposed that the camp should be incorporated into the Dachau boundaries. The other villages protested heavily, but top-ranking SS leaders and representatives and the Nazi regime supported this idea, and the plan was accomplished in April 1939. Mayor Kramer proudly invited the town's ceremony that sealed the incorporation. Among the guests were also local dignitaries like the bank director, the parish priests from Dachau, and of course Heinrich Himmler and the camp commandant Hans Lorenz. A main reason that Kramer was so keen to incorporate the concentration camp was his hope that the town could profit economically by the connection. And indeed, some companies in Dachau were commissioned by the SS, especially for building works inside the camp. One of them was the constructor Otto Reichel, whose enterprise built several barracks for the SS. But for many tasks, the huge SS base in Dachau had also developed their own workshops. And in other cases, the camp administration turned to companies in Munich, like Urban und Zwanziger, an enterprise that began as a small plumber's workshop and rose to a company for sewer constructions due to many commissions in various concentration camps. During the enlargement of Dachau concentration camp, the staff of Otto Reichel and Urban und Zwanziger entered the camp every day. These so-called civil workers instructed the labor squads of the prisoners, who at the same time were guarded by the SS. Survivors report about the increasing terror in that time. The prisoners were forced to work for weeks on and without a rest day, frequently even at a running pace. The death rate in Dachau was increasing. At the same time, a company like Otto Reichel earned within 2 years 300,000 Reichsmark only by their commissions in the concentration camp. Only to compare it, a pint beer in that time was about 40 pence, or a liter milk was 25 pence. So you can imagine 300,000 Reichsmark was a lot. The contacts between the camp and its surroundings did not end at the beginning of the Second World War. More and more prisoners' transports arrived at the Dachau rail station in full view of the civilian population as SS-men beat and drove the prisoners to the camp. Prisoners were also deployed as forced laborers in the town. In 1941, the large meat packer Wülfert took the first prisoners to their storage cellar right in the center of Dachau at the Schlossberg. So the Dachau listeners know the Schlossberg, of course. And in 1943, more than 300 prisoners were brought to the factory site in the Schleißheimer Straße. They had to work in the slaughterhouse, in the shipping department, or at Dachau railway station to load the boxes with canned meat onto wagon trains. So, in summary, we can state that the relationship between the concentration camp and its surrounding was close and manifold. There were private, political, administrative, and economical connections. During the last 2 decades, historians intensified their research on the camp personnel. And I may add, a former colleague from Dachau Memorial Site, Kerstin Schwenke, now wrote her PhD about the visits of delegations in the concentration camp, which will be published, I think, in November or in the end of the year. The perpetrators did not live isolated from society, of course. Families, comrades, friends, but also neighbors, public authorities, and business partners had a variety of reasons for their actions and why they interacted with the camp personnel. Some citizens might have seen the rich choice of products in the shops at the SS residential estate. Others saw their own profit when they did business with the SS. And a mayor like Hans Kramer, but also the managing director Hans Wülfert, were convinced National Socialists. Whatever the specific motives of the interactions with the camp personnel were, one matter all had in common. They created an affirmative setting that helped to organize the concentration camp as a site of terror in Dachau. Thank you. That's it. Thank you.
Dirk, can you
yes,
close? Okay, great. Thank you. Good. Then we move on to our third speaker, which is Jens Schley. Jens Schley is historian and journalist, lives in Berlin, but works a lot on the history and has been working a lot on the history of Thuringia, a region in East Germany, and that's also where his topic for tonight's talk is located. He's currently conducting research on behalf of the city of Nordhausen on the air raids on the city in April 1945. And at the University of Erfurt, he's member of a research network on the history of the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, former East Germany, and the post-reunification period, i.e. the years after 1990. And his topic for tonight is Weimar, Buchenwald, the city and the camp. Jens, please.
Yeah. Hello and good evening on all. And first, I will try it in English, but my English is very bad. And when it will be too terrible, please tell me, and then we try to find a solution for a better way. Okay, the Buchenwald story is a very similar story to Dachau. The little different is that Buchenwald was a little away from the city, 8 kilometers on the north side of Ettersberg, so that you can the camp not directly visible from the town. But that's no reason for a dense neighborhood between. The story of Dachau is so similar to the Buchenwald story. I would like to concentrate me on a few central remarks on the question of the coexistence of Buchenwald camp and the city of Weimar. But in 1937 was, instead of all, geopolitical decision and then a local political decision. The Gauleiter of Thüringen, Fritz Sauckel, wanted a large camp in his Gau, and Himmler wanted a large camp in Mitteldeutschland, also in the center of Germany, of the so-called second generation, and these two wishes find a solution then in Weimar. The neighborhood of Buchenwald and Weimar had two sides. Firstly, it was like Dachau or like Belgrade or like all the other cities with camps in the near or areas. It was a normal integration of a concentration camp into the bureaucratic, economic, and infrastructural integration of these camps into its surroundings. Here above all, the Thüringen capital of Weimar at the time. On the other hand, the camp is an important, and I think this is also important for understanding the functions of the concentration camps in the neighborhood or in the society. The camp is an important local power institution of the Nazi state, not only in the sense of a place of repression, but also as a place that the national community was proud of Buchenwald. You can see in Weimar in this time, Weimar was proud of the camp. And when it's said a little bit, I think it's not the right word, but we can discuss about this. Buchenwald is part of the empowerment of the national community, or better, of the so-called Volksgemeinschaft in Weimar. There, in the beginning, or since the beginning, the SS was a very important symbol of the power of the Nazi party in Weimar. You can see it, and it was all in the time. Now it's the word. It's not. It was connected with the Buchenwald camp. The most important of this is the large SS guards in Buchenwald and in the city on two places. In the end, in 1945, more than 7,000 members of the SS was in Buchenwald and in Weimar. And in these two parts, the normal neighborhood of a great institution in the town and in the ideological neighborhood, you can see how the neighborhood was developed. The Buchenwald camp was a really normal place in a normal everyday life of Nazi society. From today's point of view, it is initially astonishing what was known about this camp, because it was only after 1945 that it was linked to the accusation of the crimes that were committed in this camp. in a former time, there was no crime, this was normal. This is important. And against this background, one has to state the population of Weimar and the population of the small places around the camp could and knew a lot about what was happening in Buchenwald, but they did not want to know a lot about these knowledges, or this knowledge, or suppress it again. I will tell it on a small example. The inmates of the camp worked in the city. They arrived at the city, how it like in Dachau, at the city train station for a very long time. Their corpses from the camp were cremated in the city cemetery for the first few years. There was a weekly transport of the corpse from the camp to the cemetery. Buchenwald and the Ettersberg, this is the hill on which the camp was located, were very popular executions destinations from the Weimar inhabitants. Even during the existence of the camp, there was a separate bus line from the camp and much more things. Buchenwald was in all this time part of the city of Weimar for the inhabitants. And in these tensions, a lot of knowledges, but no wanting to know, was not resolved after the liberation in 1945. In contrast, it was reinforced. The formal, since this time, and this is also for me important to understanding the remembrance of the neighborhood. Now, the inhabitants of the famous Goethe city of Weimar could not have anything to do with the Buchenwald camp. And this is formula of this memory narrative has an astonishing endurance to this day, with small changes. In the first post-war decades, the neighborhood between town and the camp was no longer an issue. Buchenwald was now the prominent location of the anti-fascist resistance struggle within the framework of a large national memorial in the GDR. Then, from the 80s, small attempts at the grassroots history began also in Weimar, as in other towns in the GDR, or you have the same movement in a Bundesrepublik. What do we have to do with Buchenwald? Actually, this was the questions of this grassroots history in Weimar. As a result, after the redesign of the memorial after 1919, the question of the neighborhood between the city and the camp of the camps, the neighborhood between the city and the camp, or that the camp as part of the national of the Volksgemeinschaft has a permanent place in the memory exhibitions. But this is not so in Weimar, also in the present. It is now for the inhabitants of Weimar, it is now good that there is a memory place for the history of the concentration camp, and Weimar must not deal with this history during the Nazi era. That can all be shown in the Buchenwald Memorial. It is not a place in the town. And I will give you a very current example for this. In Weimar, there is an art festival in every summer. This year, as part of the festival in front of the town hall in Weimar, which is currently being renovated, a large poster was placed with a photo of the liberation camp on April the 5th in 1945. The action, I think, is in the right place, because in this town hall, many decisions were made between 1937 and 1945 about how Weimar worked with Buchenwald. But if you look in the momentary discussions about this poster in the social networks, for instance, Facebook, or also by Twitter, then the Weimar citizens are not understand what will this action, because they say this story belongs to Buchenwald, not to Weimar. the history of Buchenwald is also in the present not a part of the history of Weimar. And that is interesting for me, because after we have now 75 years, there's not resolved the problem that Buchenwald is a part of the history of Weimar. So that's my very small remarks. And I hope of a discussion. Sorry for the bad English. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think we quickly move on to our commentators. We have also 3 short comments on the various presentations. And the first for the commentary would be Caroline Metzger. She is a research associate at the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich. And there she leads a Leibniz Junior Research Group under the title You Hear, You Talk, Informal Communication and Information from Below in Nazi Europe, which also has the slick acronym of Infocom. And her first book that was published this year, despite Corona, she could still publish Forging Germans, Youth, Nation and the National Socialist Mobilization of Ethnic Germans in Yugoslavia, 1918 to 1944. Over to you, Caroline.
Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me and having me here, and also for the excellent presentations. So I think in all of these presentations, there are several very interesting factors that bring them together. I think one is very specifically related to geography. So when we're speaking of, for instance, this very interesting question of what did people know at the time, I think geography and space act as very important components. So we had examples of camps that were embedded within cities, right outside of cities, basically within the infrastructure of certain towns, where basically people saw directly what was happening. So in a former research project, I looked at Yugoslavia quite specifically, and well, Belgrade. And I think this question also showed up in the chat, as far as I can see. The question of, well, how were people from Samišta murdered, for instance? And I mean, this has been looked at quite specifically by historians. And so what you had essentially were gas vans, for instance, that went basically crossed the river from the camp towards Belgrade, and the exhaust of these vans were directly filtered into basically the vans, so that people over months and months and months of these transport, thousands of people were murdered. Now these murders happened directly within the city, passing through the city essentially. And I think this is just one very concrete example of how proximity and I think knowledge go together in these cases. Now, in my current research, I'm looking at, well, as Christoph Thonfeld said, basically informal communication under National Socialism. So in a sense, what I'm looking at with my doctoral students is, let's say, this communication beyond sort of state propaganda, state censorship, how sort of communication from above, knowledge from above, interacted with knowledge from below, so to speak. And I think this is quite interesting, because then suddenly you go beyond issues of proximity and geography to questions of, well, communication and knowledge. So actually, since we have this example of Dachau, I think it's quite fascinating that, I mean, I have, let's say in my project, I have this very interesting case study of, for instance, the Option in South Tyrol. So not to get into too many details, but essentially the ethnic German minority there of some just over 200,000 people were faced with a choice in late 1939 because of a German-Italian agreement. Well, will they settle to the Reich, Heimensreich, or will they stay and essentially become, you know, real Italians? So there were massive propaganda efforts on both sides, and especially, let's say, propagandists, particularly from the clergy, who tried to scare people away from going to the Reich. They used rumors on Dachau to try and deter people essentially from going to the Reich. So this was late 1939. So you have rumors circulating beyond Germany about what might be happening within the camps in Germany, what moving to Germany might mean for freedom of speech, for belonging to the Volksgemeinschaft or not, and what the consequences of things like dissent might be. And interestingly, in this case, Dachau became, in a sense, a symbol for sort of National Socialist oppression that went beyond the immediate environment of, let's say, town and camp community. So that's my first impression. Perhaps we'll move on to the other commentators. Or
yeah, thank you very much. Then we'll exactly do that and move on to Zanela Schmid. Zanela Schmid received her PhD in 2011 from the University of Bern in Switzerland on for her doctoral thesis on the topic of German and Italian occupation in the independent state of Croatia, 1941 to 1943, respectively 1945. Currently, she's a member of a research project at Humboldt University Berlin on the topic of appropriation of Jewish property in Yugoslavia, 1940, 1941 to 1945. Zanela, over to you.
Thank you for the very kind introduction. What struck me after these three presentations was what I read in the book of by Sibylle Steinbacher, that when she talks about Auschwitz, she said at the end, one could come to terms with a mass murder. And I think this is also true for all the three examples that we heard now today. But still, I would like to stress this, that the place of Belgrade is, of course, another one, as it was, of course, an occupied city. So the population of Belgrade had played another role. So they were victims and bystanders at the same time. For once, Milovan already said that starting from August, the men at Topolsky Shupe were killed, and then later on there were mass killings of many more Serbian citizens. So from that perspective, Serbian population in Belgrade was, of course, victims. On the other hand, they were bystanders, as they were seeing, like, every day what was happening to their, well, to their friends, to their neighbors, and so on, who were now at the Semlin concentration camp, or before that at Topolsky Shupe. And what Carolina already said is that the lorry, the van that in which the women and the children of the Topolsky Shupe camp were killed, that was driving through Belgrade, it was known what was its purpose. It was rumors, exactly, but the Belgraders gave it a name. It was called Dušev Kupka. I would translate it maybe destroyer of the souls or something similar. So they had an idea what was happening. So it was not something far away that no one could have known. On the other hand, here is really the question: what could they do at the end? What was which roles could they have assumed? And I'm not talking about the administration, of course, that did assume some not so how to say that did collaborate with the occupiers. So this is a question that we could think about. So what are the possibilities to cope with such a situation in an occupied city? One thing I wanted to add, it's only one piece of information, is that when Dirk Riedel told us about Dachau, that it was scattered on 4 or 5 different communities, the interesting thing about the Salmište camp is that it was situated in another state. Across the Sava River, it wasn't Serbia anymore, the occupied Serbia. It was part of the independent state of Croatia, but it didn't play such a big role for the German occupiers, who still saw it as a part of their occupational territory. It was also supplied by Belgrade. So the city had to, that leads me to the next point I have written down, is that the city did not profit really much from the camp. On the contrary, it had to supply the camp without any beneficence. So I think I will stop here. These are my impressions, so that maybe we can discuss them later.
Okay, then let's move on to our third commentator, which is Christian Schölzel. Christian Schölzel received his PhD from University of Leipzig with a biography on the German industrialist and politician Walter Rathenau. In 2004, he founded the freelance agency Culture and More, and he's since the CEO of Culture and More for history-related services. And he has been part of or in charge of more than 200 projects internationally, worldwide, and concerning research, exhibitions, apps, and so on, and not least also here in Dachau. Christian, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentations. And I would like to come back to the structure you suggested in the very beginning, Christoph, concerning the 3 spheres or topics of knowledge, relationships, and let's say the sphere of rumors, jokes, and social psychological imagos, pictures, whatever one might call it. To come to the first point, just some thoughts which came into my mind about knowledge. I think one of the main questions is, or one of the main tensionous relationships are the questions, is there an intended conspiration of these places, these camps, places, sites of persecutions, or do we have some kind of intention to keep them half confidential, half conspirative, whatever you might call it, half public, in the sense of jokes like beware, otherwise you will come to Dachau. What we also have, I read it in the book from Jens Schley for Buchenwald, pass auf, sonst kommst du nach Buchenwald. So the question of intentionalism, is there any intention to keep these camps secret or not? Or is there just the proudness that this is a part, like Jens Schley has put it, is this the proudness to be a part of the Volksgemeinschaft? Second thing, the relationship you mentioned, Christoph. Zanella brought up the differentiation between occupied and non-occupied countries, and I think the question of collaboration is also there essential. We not only have the society of persecutors and bystanders and a few resistant fighters probably, but we also have the question of collaboration, and this also influences later the memory, especially in the socialist and post-socialist countries, the memory, the history of memory about these camps and their perception during the time of Second World War. So the question of collaboration, for example, to stay in the example of former Yugoslavia, was thrown out for the moment, and also the question of victim groups and stuff like that was unified in some kind of socialistic narratives. Even in parts of the occupied countries, probably one has to differentiate between, for example, Seimischte and Auschwitz. We do have also the study from Sibylle Steinbacher on Auschwitz, camp and town, and she emphasized there that there came a lot of so-called new Germans, so-called Volksdeutsche, which have been settled there in the near surrounding of the camp, even if the camp wasn't directly in the town of Auschwitz. Is there any influence, and is there any change in the perception of a camp? One could ask. So also even in the occupied territories, we are facing differences. To come to the third part of Christoph, the question of knowledge, rumor, stuff like that. Just the idea we should keep in mind the sphere of language, like thinking of Victor Klemperer and Lingua Tertia Peri, LTI. We should think of the collective or individual subconscious. We don't have so much sources about that, but I'm thinking about the book of Charlotte Behra, the psychoanalyst. She wrote about the experiences with clients in psychoanalysis between 1933 and 1938. Then she had to immigrate, and she had as clients bystanders, persecutors, and so on. And it's very interesting to see what are the dreams of the victim clients and the persecutor clients she also dealt with. So talking about the perception of persecution and camps, it could be very interesting to go also into this direction. Okay, this is probably for the moment everything. more questions than answers or comments.
Okay, so far that was, thank you very much to all three speakers and three commentators, and we still have enough time to invite questions. I think for the first round, Maximilian Lüttgens has already received some questions via the online chat. I think they are directed to individual speakers, but of course then everybody else also should feel free to join in and add onto the reply. And then we can take questions from the open floor afterwards.
Yes, right. There's one question to Jens Schley. The question is by Stefan Burger. Why did the SSS call the camp Buchenwald and not KZ Weimar?
Yeah, okay. I take this in German, sorry, because it's better and it's shorter. Buchenwald ist ja in der Tat das einzige Konzentrationslager, was einen künstlichen Namen hat, zumindest von den Konzentrationslagern auf dem Reichsgebiet. Das liegt daran, das ist wirklich ein Eingeständnis an die Stadt Weimar, weil in Weimar hat die sogenannte NS-Kulturgemeinde, nachdem die SS erst habe, hat das Lager soll wieder Berg heißen. KZ Ettersberg hat sie Widerspruch eingelegt und sagte, Ettersberg steht mit der Hütte in Zusammenhang und das wollen wir nicht. Und daraufhin wurde auf einen künstlichen Namen entschieden, nämlich Buchenwald, den es sonst so nicht gibt. Der einzige Realitätsbezug ist, dass der Wald tatsächlich vorwiegend aus Buchen besteht. Das ist insofern auch bemerkenswert, weil dieser Widerspruch auch zeigt, also dieser Widerspruch der NS-Kulturgemeinde, dass man eben auch schon 1937 um das Wesen eines KZs weiß und man wollte eben den Namen Goethe, der ja in Weimar 1832 extrem wichtig, nicht sozusagen beschmutzen durch ein Konzentrationslager. Also das ist der konkrete Grund dafür. Ja. I'm ready.
Shall we maybe quickly summarize just the gist of it in English, that mostly the naming of the concentration camp Buchenwald was a kind of artificial name other than the concentration camps in Germany normally would have. And that was especially out of taking into consideration the reputation of the city of Weimar as the city of Goethe, that they wouldn't refer to Buchenwald in any kind of relation connected to Weimar.
Thank you very much. There's another question to Dirk Riedel. The plantation shop is often cited as a key site of interaction and resistance. Do you have a sense of just how popular this shop was among the local residents?
Well, I cannot say how popular it really was, but we know that people went there to go shopping and to get products which were produced in the plantation. And I think for the SS itself and for those responsible for the plantation, much more important were the bigger companies or the Wehrmacht and other institutions that needed the products. But still, it had a reason that they had also a shop for local population to go there. So there, I guess there must have been someone who wanted to use this shop. Otherwise, they wouldn't have built up the shop. Is that clear? I hope.
Yeah, thank you, Dirk Riedel. Are there any more questions? No, not yet. So maybe I hand over to Christoph Thornfeld.
Yeah, I'm happy to join in and enter a few questions. I mean, I have several questions to all presenters, but maybe start only with one each. I would like to pick up one aspect which also popped up already in the comments of Sanela and Caroline, the different situation that we have in Serbia with the occupation regime. Then we have a kind of Quisling local regime, and so there's a different context for the buildup of the camps. So I was wondering whether this had any impact on whether local companies were brought into, that they had to supply services for the camp, whether there was only local forced labor brought in, or whether there were contracted laborers, how the buildup of the camps functioned in that case.
Yeah, yes, the municipality of Belgrade had the duty to supply, to deliver food and other things to the camp. So it means that several, I mean, the municipality of Belgrade and also the other offices connected to the municipality. It means that they were constantly, every day, in contact with the camp. And we have, for example, a very important exchange of letters and communication between the commander of the camp, Herbert Andorfer, and the municipality of Belgrade. So we know, for example, exactly how many, I don't know, what they had to deliver on which day. So the camp and the municipality of Belgrade, they were not only in contact, but they let's say, I mean, cooperated. On the other hand, as it's already been told, the gas van started in Seimischte in March 42, and until until May 42, the gas van every day, every single day, but not on Saturday and Sunday, but only during the week. the gas van passed through the city, through the center of the city. So also in this case, you know, the local population was directly in contact with what was happening. On the other hand, I think that yes, it's true and it's correct that, you know, the population of Belgrade, they were under occupation, and we can consider them also as victims, especially because, you know, of the war, of the retaliations against the Serbian population. But on the other hand, we have also to stress that the regime of Milan Nedic, they played an important role in arresting the Jews and the Roma. They had an important role in propaganda, and the local population of Belgrade was starting from April 41. They were also the target of the propaganda. So they had, I mean, I think that we have also to consider the effects of the propaganda on the local population of Belgrade.
May I add something to that? So I really appreciated Sanila's comments, actually, and Christian too, about how, in fact, the Serbian case is a case of, well, a society under occupation, and much more than that, it's an absolutely multi-ethnic context as well, which you don't have to the same degree in Germany. So, for instance, well, maybe Milovan Pisari can tell me exactly how this worked, right? But as far as I understand from my research on ethnic Germans in Serbia, they in fact used sort of the banks next to the Sajmište camp in Zemlin to help relocate tens of thousands of ethnic Germans coming from Bukovina, Bessarabia, and so on. And essentially, the people who built the barracks in this case, now this was 1940, so before, let's say the site was used for the internment of Jews and local source laborers and so on and so forth. I mean, essentially the people who not only financed but built and ran these barracks and these relocation camps were the local ethnic Germans. So I think certainly if you look at Yugoslavia, you have this, let's say, case of multiple conflicts and sort of front lines, let's say, within a society where, well, in this case, certainly the ethnic Germans were very crucial in also, let's say, locating and deporting ultimately, let's say, Jewish men, women, and children from societies like in the Banat, the Bachka, and so on. So.
Okay, thank you very much. There's another question by Sibylle Reinecke. The question is for Dirk Riedel. It's about the gardens behind the houses of the SS. Were they used for self-supply by the SS families?
Yes, as far as I know, yes. So the houses, they had their gardens, and of course they could use them for their families. We have reports that in some instances, prisoners of the concentration camp even had to do work there, but it was not officially, it was for the private families of the SS living there.
And I've heard something about the so-called animal park or wild park behind the camp. Was this kind of park only open for the soldiers of the SS, or also for the people of Dachau?
No, this was not for the people of Dachau. This was part of the concentration camp, and it was a kind of illegal project or unofficial project of that time concentration camp commandant Hans Loritz, similar as the zoo in Buchenwald. So there are a lot of parallels between the camp commandants Koch and Loritz and between the two camps Buchenwald and Dachau.
Thank you.
There was a, I can speak?
Yes.
It's okay? Yeah, there was a little different to Buchenwald. In Buchenwald was also a so-called Bärensinger in the near of the camp. This was also only for guests of the SS to look in, and how Turks say it was especially from the Lagerkommandant Koch. And then in Buchenwald was also another place, the so-called Falkenhof, by SS. And this was for the people of Weimar and for all other to see how this little zoo practice so. And there was an extra paper for this Falkenhof. You can buy it, and you can see how it goes with these birds and all of this. And this was one of the nerds in English Freizeitangebot for the people to look on at this work in the near of the camp. This was, I think, one camp. Yeah.
There seems to be currently no further question from the open floor, so I would set in with another question, this time for Dirk Riedel. I've come across in the research of Sibylle Steinbacher about the media reception, if you can say so, of the concentration camp, that there was immediately after the camp was opened, there were texts running like the Dachau as an exemplary concentration camp or as a model concentration camp, as if it was something the city could be proud of. But then only a couple of years later, there were discussions among municipal authorities whether the reputation of being a city with a concentration camp would actually have a negative impact on tourism, on people coming to Dachau. Have you come across those aspects in your research?
Well, a little bit. So this is yes, very focused. It is true that in the beginning, when the camp was built up, there were a lot of articles about the camp, and there were also some journalists who were proud of that or fostered this a little bit. And the Bavarian political police, the Gestapo, was well, they were satisfied with these press articles because they used this also as a kind of threat. So this is similar to what Caroline Metzger also mentioned, that Dachau as a kind of threat was used. And there are always two sides. On the one hand, it was of course used to suppress critical opinions. The National Socialists didn't want to have, but on the other side, it also meant that they had a kind of feeling that the people in Germany mainly would support these articles and maybe would even laugh about some cynical jokes made about the prisoners. So I read a lot of articles in the press from Augsburg where they published texts like the next 100 have a new home in Dachau, and so on. I have not found too many reports from people living in Dachau, how they felt with that. And I cannot say if the Dachau inhabitants really were afraid that they will have less tourists because of the concentration camp. So I didn't come across with that. But what is true, and what was also some kind of conflict between the city and the concentration camp, was when prisoners were released. They didn't have the money to go home. They couldn't afford a ticket for the train or for the bus. And so several of them went to the official facilities and said, well, I'm someone who's living in Augsburg or in Nuremberg, but I cannot get home and I need support from the city. And so the municipal authorities got in contact to the concentration camp and said, this cannot be true, that we have to pay for concentration camp prisoners that they can go back home. And then indeed the concentration camp or the SS organized that the political police had to pay money to the prisoners that they can afford a ticket to drive home when they were released from the concentration camp. So this was important, especially in the years before the war, as several German prisoners were released again after a while, after several years, usually.
Also vielleicht dazu auch noch eine Ergänzung. Da muss man ja nach Jahren unterscheiden, was dann eben nicht für Dachau gilt, sondern auch für die anderen Lager. Also in der Frühzeit 1933, 34 und auch noch 1935 als oder Ziel eigener Berichterstattung von Zeitungen, weil sie im Ausdruck waren für ein neues Konzept der Strafverfolgung beziehungsweise auch ein neues Konzept der Erziehung durch Arbeit. Also das steckt ja in diesen frühen Konzentrationslagern sehr viel drin. Dann wurde diese Berichterstattung gewollt unterbrochen, Stichwort 1936, Olympische Spiele. Man wollte nicht eine große Berichterstattung darüber. Und dann verändert sie eigentlich, aber was dann ganz interessant ist, wenn man zum Beispiel schaut in Weimar, es gibt das Treffen der HJ in der Stadt, was von der SS mitorganisiert wird, dann ist in der Berichterstattung das Lager Buchenwald ein ganz normaler Bestandteil. Also in dem Sinne von, da hat dann auch die SS vom Buchenwald mitgeholfen und so weiter. So, und man merkt es auch, das war in Weimar, gibt es einen großen Anlass, als 2 Häftlinge flüchten und über Zeitungen nach ihnen gesucht wird und dann ihre Wiederergreifung auch gemeldet wird. Dann merkt man immer, dass die Konzentrationslager ein ganz normaler Bestandteil sind, eben der Gesellschaft. Man muss nicht erklären, was das ist und warum es diese Orte gibt. Es ist ganz klar, dass es sie gibt. Und sie tauchen auch in der Presse auf und das ist interessant, wenn man sich sozusagen mit der Volksgemeinschaft einig ist über die Verfolgung bestimmter Gruppen. Also ich fand das ganz interessant, dass man Berichte findet nach 1938, nach der Pogrom, nach der Verhaftungswelle von Juden, die ja in die KZs gebracht werden, um dort sozusagen ihr Vermögen zu erpressen, sie zur Ausreise zu zwingen und so weiter. Auch da tauchen die Konzentrationslager als was ganz Selbstverständliches wieder in den Zeitungen auf. So, ja.
Maybe I would again quickly summarize for those not familiar with German. So Jens Schley pointed out that there's of course also a development in media coverage of the camps, that this phase, this very early phase in 1933, where press reports were dominated by a kind of pride, official pride of concentration camp, and also highlighting the aspect of education from the government's point of view that these camps were supposed to entertain. And then we have relatively quickly, this coverage would be silenced in Dachau. I think it was already around 1934, after the execution of the SA leadership, the reports from Dachau concentration camp became a lot less. And then Jens Schley highlighted 1936 as another watershed point where coverage changed or died down. And then he highlighted 1937, when Buchenwald came into existence, that we have concentration camps are already part of the normality. There's no need to explain what is a concentration camp, why are they there, what is the function. These things are already taken as general knowledge or generally accepted knowledge.
There's another question by George Poulados. First of all, he's writing, congratulations on the work you have been doing. So it's a question to all of you. How does your work become known to the wider public and what are the reactions? So maybe it's about the people in Dachau and Belgrade nowadays. What do they think about your research?
Yeah, I can answer first. I don't know if you, considering Belgrade and our project, we have different activities. We have a website. I'll share with you the link. You can find different materials. We are finishing with the website, and there will be a version in Serbian and a version in English. And there will be some historical texts and some documents, of course, letters from the inmates and the materials we found in the archives. You can see also about our activities, because we organize visits to the location, and you can find, for example, also the videos of the visits. There is also another important aspect, and for example, we organize these presentation of the project activities and the project results. And for example, tomorrow we will continue the discussion, but we will focus on Topovske Šupe, on the place and other similar places in Europe. So we will deal with the topic of the places of non-remembrance. It means the places where, for example, some concentration camps were active during the Second World War, and these places were forgotten after the Second World War. And today, thanks to local initiatives, people know about these places. So we will have examples from France, from Italy, from the Czech Republic, and from Croatia, and of course from Belgium. I'll send you the program. I think that I can share you in the chat the program. So if you want to also to follow us tomorrow, and on Sunday we will have a visit to the location of the Topovske Šupe camp and a discussion with the president of the Federation of the Jewish Communities from Serbia, and from a representative from the Ministry of Culture, because you will talk also about the memorialization of Sajmište and Topovske Šupe, and about the law on the memorial in Sajmište, because you know Serbia still doesn't have a memorial, and but the law passed in some months ago in the Serbian parliament. So we will discuss about the significance and importance of the law.
There's a direct question by Eileen Lyon to Milovan. Will you be considering Gusen?
Well, there is not now, but I mean there are a lot of places all around Europe that we could consider. So we have unfortunately to make a choice, considering also our project partners and so on. I worked 2 years ago on a project for an Italian association, and we talked. I mean, one of the focus was this camp, because there was a group of Slovenian that were arrested by the Italian authorities in '43, and they were interned in a camp in Italy. And then after the German invasion of Italy, they were collected and sent to the Gusen camp. And for many years in Italy, they were considered as Italians, but they were not Italian. So this I had contact, let's say, with this place. But yes, maybe in the future we have to consider also this place and to include in our project. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. Dirk and Jens, maybe you also like to add something to the question we had before about the reactions of the wider public today, or also.
I'm no longer working in Dachau Memorial Site, so I cannot talk about that. But I'm working at the Center of the Documentation Center of the History of National Socialism in Munich. And what I could add is that the population in Munich, and this is a little bit what I try to express also by what I said before, is Munich was also quite close to the concentration camp, and in Munich the people always feel a little bit, well, people from Munich were taken to the concentration camp. It was nearby, but in the end, thank God that I'm not living here in Dachau, but I'm in Munich. And the town of Munich has not to cope with the history in a way as Dachau has. And I think it would be important to talk more about the close relationship between Dachau and Munich, also here in Munich. So this is a little bit similar maybe with the situation in Weimar, as Weimar is also a town which is known. I don't want to talk bad about Dachau, but well, I guess Weimar is known for more things than Dachau, maybe, if you exclude the concentration camps. And Munich is also a town no one thinks about the concentration camp nearby when people are talking about Munich, and I think there should be a change. And of course, the Documentation Center tries to inform about the history and the historical sites. And I think, as I've been for a long time working in Dachau, they do as well.
Für Weimar ist es sehr speziell. Also das ist das, was Dirk eben sagte. Also die Beziehungen zwischen Stadt und Lager sind ja einmal hinzu, also dieser extreme Überbau der Goethestadt. Und das ist das, was der frühere Leiter der Gedenkstätte, also nach 1990, Volkert Knicke, mal beschrieben hat. Da entsteht quasi so eine Art Bermuda-Dreieck, in dem alles historisches Wissen verschwindet, weil die Goethestadt muss sauber bleiben. Die darf sich sozusagen nicht beschädigen. Und das ist in Weimar extrem drin. Und da hat man Buchenwald auf der einen Seite ganz gut integriert, eben sozusagen als den Ort außerhalb von Weimar, wo die Verbrechen stattgefunden haben und wo eben dieses große Konzentrationslager war. Und auf der anderen Seite wird es dann sehr, sehr ernst und auch sehr kompliziert, wenn man sozusagen die NS-Gesellschaft in der Stadt sichtbar macht, wenn es an Goethe angeht. Also es gab vor wenigen Jahren einen sehr großen Streit in der Stadt, als es eine Forderung gab, die Stiftung Weimarer Klassik, die ganzen Goethe-Stätten verwaltet, möge sich mal dazu bekennen, auch öffentlich bekennen, nicht nur in der Wissenschaft, wie sehr sie von Hitler zum Beispiel gefördert wurde, also dass das Goethe-Haus ja nur mit einer großzügigen Privatspende von Hitler gebaut werden konnte. Und da ist dann auch bei der Stiftung Weimarer Klassik Schluss. Also das will sie nicht. Und das ist sozusagen die Gemengelage in Weimar. Das heißt, wenn es darum geht, dass man die Verbrechen benennt, die in Buchenwald stattgefunden haben und auch sie auch bestens aufarbeitet, kein Problem. Da gibt es dann auch eine sehr enge Zusammenarbeit mit der Stadt und also mit den Institutionen der Stadt. Aber wenn man diese Verbrechen sozusagen in die Stadt hineinträgt, auch noch kein Problem. Aber wenn man sie verbindet mit dem klassischen Weimar und zeigt, das alles gehört schon irgendwie zusammen, dann wird es hoch problematisch und da ist dann auch Schluss mit dem Verständnis. Das will man nicht. Das ist die Situation in Weimar und die ist auch eben, das hatte ich versucht an dem Beispiel zu zeigen, aktuell. Ja.
So Mr. Scholzel raised his hand, so maybe you want to add something?
How to broaden the knowledge and the discussion about camps and their surroundings. I think this can be done on two ranges. In the range of science and scientific studies, I think we need more comparisons of sites, for example, in occupied and non-occupied areas. The second sphere will be the so-called public history. We can develop, for example, for sites of former camps, smartphone apps and stuff like that, to lead people to these sites today in their today's state, probably also to show them and to give them the impression, if there is no memorial site, for example, like in Dachau, to give them the idea about the situation and to add this reception with information given by, for example, a mobile information in situ at the location. Thank you.
Thank you. Sibylle Reinecke from the audience raised her hand. Sibylle, maybe you also like to add something?
I just want to do one remark concerning the image of the name of Dachau. As Caroline told, Dachau was on one hand a threat, and concerning this plantation, or as the Nazis told it, herbal garden of Dachau, it was named differently because the shop where the people from Dachau could come to buy plants or herbs or herbal teas, that was named Herbal Garden Dachau. But they produced there a so-called additional herbal spice, so-called Prittelbacher pepper spice. And that was not named Dachau, because there are letters telling to sell this all over the Reichsdeutschland. Perhaps nobody will want to buy Dachau pepper, alternative pepper, because that's a problem of the image. And therefore this was named Prittelbacher pepper spice, because it was not pepper. And therefore it was not said, instead of, it was a thing of own worth. And therefore it was not able to name this Dachau. So it was like that and like the opposite. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sibylle. Are there other comments? Otherwise, I will. Oh, okay. Mr. Thunfeld.
Yeah. Maybe I would quickly join in on my impressions as I started my work here in Dachau almost exactly half a year ago. So the impressions are relatively new. And on the one hand, I have to say I was impressed that around Dachau concentration camp memorial sites, there's a number of civil society initiatives who also work towards spreading knowledge about the city's past and the concentration camp history. And there are a lot of people devoting a lot of time and effort into making the past known. So that, for me, was a very positive impression. But on the other hand, as due to Corona, we had to shift a lot of our efforts in terms of events, in terms of activities into virtual space. And I remember that when we had, unfortunately this year, the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Dachau, couldn't have an online, on-site celebration, but only online celebration. And there were posts on the commemoration of the liberation. And I saw there was in a commentary section of our Facebook post, I found a lot of comments which on the one hand went along lines of currently we have more severe problems, we need to face this pandemic and deal with this pandemic, and also heard a lot of people who mentioned things like couldn't it be enough after 75 years? Do we still have to raise this topic and talk about this issue? So it seems to me that there's still a very split public opinion when it comes to Dachau.
Right. I remember the documentary on the second German channel ZDF this April. I think it was in April. I can later on put a link into the chat. In this documentary about the memorial site, the journalists from the ZDF there were asking a lot of people in Dachau about their relationship to the memorial site, and there were some older people from a football fan club from the FC Bayern Munich, and they said, three of them said in this documentary that they want to destroy. For them, it would be great to destroy the memorial site, to get new place for houses and so on. And this was quite shocking for me to see. And I know that there are some more older people in Dachau who are always saying, okay, now it's enough, we should forget it and so on. But when I spoke in the last years with mostly younger people in Dachau, they always said to me, and also doing the guided tours in the memorial site, that they are proud that the city of Dachau is talking about their history, and for them it's great to see that people from all around the world come today to Dachau and see this as a positive example. And so there are these two different meanings, I would say. So so maybe we go to another topic, because there are a few more questions. There's one question by Patricia Pietro Soto. The first question is to Milovan Pisari. In Dachau in the 1940s, there were specific rules according to which local population was not allowed to get close to the fence which surrounded the camp. I assume this was not the case in the second camp in Belgrade.
Yes, we know that for considering the first camp, the camp of Topolskie Szupe, we know that the families of the inmates, they were in contact, and they could come to the fence for delivering foods and other things to the inmates. And this is also the situation. I mean, thanks also to this contact, we have some letters from the inmates. Yes, so definitely they were in contact. They had the possibility to go to the fence. Considering the Sajmište, I'm not sure, but we know that the local Serbian population, they walked close to the camp because it was the only way to go to the other city, to Zemun. So I don't know if they had the possibility to go closer to the fence, but of course they were, maybe 10 meters, 5 or 10 meters from the fence.
Thank you very much. There's another question to Dirk Riedel. Did these rules focused on avoiding people to see what happened inside, or rather with the security of the site? What could be seen outside? So-called Himmelfahrtskommandos and so on. Yeah, what could be seen outside was not much better.
I don't know if I understood correctly, but I think the question is about could the people outside of the camp know what was going on inside? What is exactly going on?
What could be seen outside? Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And of course, the people from outside could not know exactly what was happening in the camp. They didn't see how prisoners were killed in the camp. But on the one hand, we have the rumors, and the people knew to be in the concentration camp means to be dehumanized, to be in danger somehow. That is what they knew. Then we have an official side. So all the prisoners dying in the concentration camp had to be registered by the municipality, by the I only know the German word, by the Standesamt, by the official registration. And so this is something which only changed in 1939, 1940. But until that point, all the prisoners dying in the concentration camp were registered directly in Dachau's town hall. So this is something which at least the official side of the town of Dachau could know. And then there were prisoners who had to work in the town. And this could have been seen by the people living around, or by people working in the same company, for example, the one as a kind of civil worker, the other one as a forced laborer. I mentioned this example of the factory called Wülfert. This is one of the biggest subsidiary camps of Dachau on the ground of the city of Dachau. And then we have the prisoners coming from the railway station being forced to march to the concentration camp. And they could have been seen also by the people. So in the end, to bring it together, people could know a lot and could inform themselves, of course, if they were interested to see more. But on the other hand, people, as Jens Schley also mentioned, often just did not want to know. They were maybe also afraid to talk about that. And they thought it's better not to get too much into details if the question was about the concentration camp. And it was a kind of normality as well, sorry. So the concentration camp belonged to the town, and they were somehow in the end used to it.
Caroline, let's go.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add something to these, I think, interesting questions and comments. I think we also cannot forget that these camps, of course, existed in a much larger landscape of violence, if you will. So, of course, Jens Schley, for instance, you discussed sort of 1938, Eispogomnacht, and so on. So I think in Germany, of course, you had outbreaks of violence. And as soon as you sort of move towards countries that were occupied, this rises exponentially. So certainly in Yugoslavia, for instance, you didn't just have, let's say, the camps and informal knowledge of the camps as a kind of deterrent. You had very public executions of hundreds of people who were taken prisoners, including thousands of Jews, to sort of retaliate against, let's say, German soldiers that were murdered or harmed as part of the resistance. And not only were these executions quite public, after they happened, the names of those who were executed were frequently listed on very public posters as a type of warning to the local population. So in a sense, these camps, they existed in a much larger ecosystem of violence and repression.
Da möchte ich vielleicht was ergänzen, weil ich glaube, das ist auch zum Verständnis wichtig, wenn man sich dieser ganzen Frage der Nachbarschaft bzw. des Wissens nähern will und das auch im besten Sinne verstehen will. Also es gibt da einen großen Nationsteil, die sich sozusagen im Kernreich befanden. Das waren ja auch Einrichtungen, die für die Dauer errichtet wurden. Sie waren von Anfang an so geplant und sie sollten letztendlich ein System werden, was auch von dem Modernitätsgedanken der Erziehung durch Arbeit geprägt war. Dann kommen die Lager hinzu, eben in den besetzten Gebieten oder in den eroberten Gebieten, die man eben auch gezielt nutzte für die Vernichtung von Menschen, so wie es sich dann auch zunehmend radikalisierte. Und hier ist ein wichtiger Unterschied. Hier gibt es einen wichtigen Unterschied, dass man eben das eine nicht im Reich machte, sondern in diesen Lagern. Und man kann das am besten merken bei dem großen oder wie beobachtet würde, wie reagiert die deutsche Bevölkerung auf die Deportation der Juden und die damit verbundene Gerüchte, was mit ihnen geschieht, nämlich dass sie umgebracht werden. Das war okay, weil da war sich die Volksgemeinschaft ziemlich einig, dass das tragen wir gemeinsam. So. Überhaupt nicht okay war es und dann wurden Gerüchte auch verfolgt und man wollte sie unterdrücken bei den T4-Aktionen. Die T4-Aktionen, also Euthanasie, die berührten etwas, weil sich ja auch die Kirche so stark dagegen gewehrt hatte. Da wollte man die Verbrechen wirklich unsichtbar machen und geheim halten. Und ich finde nach wie vor ein guter Schlüssel zu diesem Verständnis, welche Funktion auch die Konzentrationslager in der Öffentlichkeit haben sollten, eben auch bei den Gerüchten, das ist auf eine nicht unmittelbare, sondern mittelbare Weise die Rede von Himmler in Posen 1943, also die berühmte vor den SS-Offizieren, wo er sie lobt, was sie geleistet haben, wenn sie diese Verbrechen begehen, aber eben sagt, wir wissen ja alle gemeinsam, dass wir hier Verbrechen begehen, aber es ist nun mal notwendig zur Durchsetzung unserer Ideologie. Und so funktionierte, glaube ich, auch das Wesen dieser Konzentrationslager. Also man wollte schon das Wissen darüber, aber die Verbrechen waren, also die Verbrechen im Sinne von Vernichtung, die waren ausgelagert. Die sollten ganz bewusst nicht im Reich stattfinden. So. Und das ist, glaube ich, auch nochmal wichtig, auch wenn man sich solche Lager anschaut wie in Belgrad, also wie sie errichtet wurden, welche Funktion sie hatten. Das ist auch wichtig für die Öffentlichkeit, die man darüber zulassen wollte oder aber eben auch herstellen wollte. Ich weiß nicht, ob ich das jetzt klar ausgedrückt habe oder ob das jetzt missverständlich war.
Aber würde das dann bedeuten, dass die Mehrheit, should I skip the English? Is it then true that the majority of the Germans, would you say, was behind this action and standing behind the camps and also behind the execution and the extermination of the Jews? Then I think I'm on the road to Goldhagen, am I? I'm not sure.
Das ist ja eine Frage, wo wir uns weit in das Gebiet der Spekulation bewegen. Das wissen wir nicht. Aber es ist schon beachtlich, wenn man sich, also da gibt es ja nun inzwischen breite Studien darüber, wenn man sich dieses sozusagen Gerüchtewissen der Deutschen anschaut, über das, was mit den Juden passiert. So, das war ziemlich detailliert und es war auch sehr genau. Und im Gegensatz, also wenn man sich dann das Verhalten von SD anschaut, wie geht man gegen die Gerüchte vor, unterdrückt man sie, da gibt es einen großen Unterschied. Also da ist man hochsensibel, wenn es um die T4-Aktionen geht, die werden ja dann auch eine Zeitweise gestoppt, weil man nicht will, dass es weiteres Wissen gibt, im Gegensatz zu den Deportationen. Also da gibt es auch seitens des Systems, des Unterdrückungssystems, so eine Art Meinung, das können die Deutschen verkraften, weil eigentlich, und jetzt behaupte ich es mal, das liegt auf einer Linie. Sozusagen dagegen werden sie sich nicht wehren. Sie sind ja Nutznießer. Also wenn man sich das einfach immer vor Augen führt, parallel zu der Deportation finden die Versteigerungen der Häuser statt, finden die Versteigerungen des Besitzes statt. Und die treffen bei den Deutschen auf große Zustimmung. So. Und natürlich ist es ein hochbanaler Akt. Ich weiß ja dem Moment, wo ich das ersteigere, dass der weg ist. So. Und ich weiß, dass er nicht mehr ausreist in die USA oder so, weil das war ja auch eine große Öffentlichkeit, dass man die Juden nicht mehr rausgelassen hat, dass man sie nicht mehr hat ausreisen lassen. Also insofern kann ich schon oder würde ich schon sagen, ja, da gab es ein viel höheres Übereinkommen zwischen der Bevölkerung und dem Staat, dass man hier richtig handelt. Das gab es in anderen Bereichen nicht. Aber was es eben auch nicht gab, und das war auch ganz gezielt so, die Vernichtung der Juden sollte nicht in den Konzentrationslagern im Kernreich stattfinden. Die sollte außerhalb stattfinden, sozusagen. Also man wollte das Verbrechen nicht sehen. Das war, glaube ich, ganz wichtig. Und das, ich denke, der Hinweis von Polen zum Beispiel in der Gegenwart ist nicht ganz unrecht, dass sie darauf drängen zu sagen, Auschwitz ist kein polnisches Konzentrationslager. Macht es euch nicht so leicht. Es ist ein deutsches Konzentrationslager, was sich im heutigen Polen befindet. Und da merkt man genau diesen Grundeffekt sozusagen, dass wir dann immer noch sagen, naja, das war ja woanders. Nein, es sorry, I'm ready.
Should I add a quick summary in English, maybe? Jens, shall I try to highlight the aspect that there was a degree of acceptance for a certain level of state crime, state organized crime or state sponsored crime, which comprised exclusion of Jewish people in Germany and also their deportation. But the actual mass murder should happen elsewhere, should not happen within the German Reich proper. And he also contrasted it with the murder program, the so-called euthanasia program against disabled and mentally ill people who were actually murdered within Germany proper, and then also in Austria after 1938, after was annexed to the Reich. And there in 1941, when protests actually against this mass murder action against disabled people, when knowledge became too public, the regime first officially stopped the program, but then we also should keep in mind they didn't stop the murder. It was just a decentralized murder, which then happened with other means, no longer with gas chambers, but with starvation, with over-medication. So there was this degree of secrecy. And then on the other hand, we also have the murder sites who then were mostly in occupied Poland, partly in the occupied Soviet Union, where mass murder could happen, but also the knowledge about it, there was still more secrecy in terms of what the German population should know. And he also pointed out that the degree of consent or confirmation of the crimes among the German population was considerably, probably higher than we would ever be able to know in terms of that people took advantage of Jewish homes, Jewish property that was sold, all kinds of belongings of Jewish people who were auctioned away or just given away for charity. And that wasn't a problem with mainstream German society.
Okay. So now we have two more questions, but they are not directly about our topic. Maybe they're more something for the end, or should I ask them? Okay, sorry, I have not seen that Dirk Riedel raised his hand. Sorry.
I didn't want to open another topic. I just very briefly wanted to answer to Patricia, because she now once again asked her question. I think these rules that people should not get too close to the concentration camp, to the walls of concentration camp, was really to prevent prisoners from escaping. So they wanted to have people not getting too near, so prisoners could not escape and no one could help them. This was also in connection with this Hans Beimler, the prisoner who could escape in 1933, and then they started measures to prevent prisoners from escaping from the concentration camp.
Are there more comments or more questions? Okay, otherwise, and there was one question on YouTube, because we are also streaming on YouTube, and the question is by Leonardo Albajari, and he wrote, do you know of cases of football matches in the camps in Dachau or in Buchenwald? So it's not directly about our topic, but maybe it's also interesting. I can say something about Dachau. It was allowed for the prisoners in the first year of the camp to play on so-called free Sundays football matches. Then afterward, and in the following years, it was of course forbidden. And from 1943 on, it was again allowed on a free Sunday for prisoners from Germany or Western Europe to play football matches. There was also something like a tournament, but these matches were not allowed for Jewish prisoners, for example, or I also think not allowed for prisoners from Eastern European countries. And the reason for it was that the SS thought about a way to help the prisoners to work harder, and they could not give them more food and so on, and so they thought about football matches and also theater plays and so on. So there were these kind of matches, but I don't know about Buchenwald. Maybe Jens Schley, can you say something about kind of football matches in Buchenwald?
Also inwiefern es jetzt sozusagen innerhalb des Lagers Sport gegeben hat, weiß ich jetzt nicht genau. Ich glaube, sowas hat es gegeben, also dass die Häftlinge Sport treiben konnten oder sogar dazu angehalten worden. Aber das hat sozusagen, wenn dann im Lager stattgefunden und auch nur für einzelne Häftlingsgruppen innerhalb der Hierarchie der Häftlinge. Nach außen hin hat die SS, die eine eigene Sportgemeinschaft gebildet hatte, also die SS-Lagertruppen, die hat Angebote an die Stadt Weimar gemacht. Das heißt, da gab es gemeinsame Laufwettbewerbe und es gab eben auch die Teilnahme an Sportwettkämpfen in der Stadt. Dazu muss man einfach wissen, dass zeitgleich mit dem Konzentrationslager 1937 in Weimar ein neues Stadion gebaut wurde. Und das sozusagen war alles Ausdruck der Neugestaltung der Gauhauptstadt Weimar. Und da waren dann eben auch alle einbezogen, die neu in diese von Sauckel gewollte NS-Musterstadt kamen. Und da war eben dann die SS auch immer dabei. Ja.
Dirk shows a book. Yeah.
Because you mentioned the sports in the concentration camp, there's now a new book by Veronika Springmann, Gunst und Gewalt. I didn't read it yet, but I was quite curious how sports was a kind of terror also in the concentration camp, and on the other hand, was used to not support prisoners, but to have some kind of Belohnung. I'm searching for my words now. It's getting too late for me. Yes, reward. Thanks.
Yeah, reward, yeah.
Kind of reward for the prisoners. On one hand, they are allowed to take part in soccer games, and on the other hand, kind of terror. and suppression.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dirk. There's
the title.
Yeah, Mr. Thornfeld.
I just quickly wanted to add, as Jens just now mentioned, sports activities organized by the city of Weimar in the later 1930s due to a new municipal stadium being built, and there were running competitions and other sports events held where the SS members took part. And that, I think, is also an important change of the perspective, that we not only think what do the people from the outside know what was going on in the camps, but also the members of the SS who usually worked in the camps, but then of course also became part of the city life and were integrated into social and cultural activities, sometimes even staged those activities themselves, but also were completely normally accepted participants in cultural activities in the city. And sports events is just one example of this wider participation and wider integration of the SS members into the local community.
Also, Eileen Lyon wrote in the chat about a book by Kevin Simpson. The name is Sucker Under the Swastika. It's maybe also about this topic. So this is another question by Cheryl Morgan Muir. She's writing, I've been really impressed with the way the concentration camp memorial site of Dachau is using virtual opportunities and social media to educate and connect with the wider public and the younger generations. Are there plans to expand this to other memorial sites? Yeah, thank you very much for this comment. Yeah, like you maybe already seen, we did a lot of Facebook tours, and this is today our second virtual conference we are doing since Corona. But we don't know what I actually don't know what the other memorial sites are doing with online. I know that we did two online tours on Facebook together with the memorial site of Neuengamme and of Bergen-Belsen. And so we talked about one topic, and everyone had something about the history of their camp. Maybe Jens, can you say something about Buchenwald? Are you doing also some virtual tours, or are you working on digital projects?
Na, nun bin ich ja seit über 10 Jahren nicht mehr in Buchenwald.
Oh, sorry.
Aber was ich sagen kann, weil ich es interessiert beobachte, wir haben jetzt ja bei vielen Gedenkstätten sozusagen in den letzten 2 Jahren den Generationswechsel vollzogen. Also es gibt viele neue Leiter und da gibt es auch einen neuen Anspruch. Und der Name Neuengamme fiel, Bergen-Belsen fiel, also der damalige Chef und jetzt seit einer Woche neue Chef von Buchenwald, Jens Wagner, der protegiert das sehr stark. Also das geht dann auch Richtung Instagram, dass man was machen will. Oder es gibt eben auch diese vielen Möglichkeiten. Also wie kann man Gedenkstätten erfahrbar machen, auch über den Einsatz von digitalen Medien. Da gibt es ja auch eine Förderstrategie des Bundes, der das endlich auch gemerkt hat. Und es gibt auch, so viel ich weiß, vor einem Jahr eine Stellungnahme innerhalb der Gedenkstätten, dass man sich dem Thema mehr widmen will. Also ich bin sehr neugierig, was da kommt, weil wenn wir dann wiederum über den Zaun schauen, Richtung USA, aber auch Richtung Niederlande, da ist schon eine Menge in Bewegung, und mal schauen, was.
I couldn't hear the last sentence, but yeah, Jens said that like when I understand it right, that the memorial site of Buchenwald is working on digital projects for the future, also on Instagram, and other memorial sites like Neuengamme or Bergen-Belsen are doing this right now. Yes, and I can also maybe say something about our next discussion we are doing with the education department. It's at the end of October. And there we are talking about education and memory in times of global crisis with colleagues from also from other memorial sites, but from outside of Germany. So there will be one colleague from Rwanda and one from Bangladesh. And so it's also kind of an international meeting. And I think Mr. Thunfeld is doing a conference like this today also in the future. Yeah. Okay. So are there more questions or more comments? Maybe Christoph Thunfeld, do you have more questions?
I could add, if people are not exhausted and somehow willing to have dinner or move on to other activities, I would have a final question to Jens Schley, as I came across in your research actually that there was a kind of a topic in, if you could call it popular dissent, about the creation of Buchenwald concentration camp, was highlighting that Buchenwald citizens were, Weimar citizens were dissatisfied about that they lost the recreational space of the Ettersberg, which was such a popular place to go. And then there was a talk about the lost Ettersberg. But at the same time, I remember that it still retained its popularity, that people would still go there despite parts of the area now being closed off for the concentration camp. Maybe you could say a little bit on this conflict between the lost Ettersberg and the still persistent popularity.
Also das ist ja insofern spannend, weil ich das am Anfang auch geglaubt hatte von diesen Forschungen, also dass das ein Konflikt gewesen wäre, dass sie dieses Ausflugsgebiet verlieren und dass sie darüber auch enttäuscht sind oder auch sich dann eben eine Art von Anti-Haltung gegenüber den Konzentrationslager aufbaut. Das ist aber, glaube ich, auch etwas rückwärtsgewandt. Also erstmal war es so, ja, sie haben einen Teil ihres Ausflugsgebietes verloren, weil genau dorthin, also in dieses ganze Wandergebiet, wurde das Konzentrationslager reingebaut, was man ja interessanterweise auch im Nachhinein noch sehen kann, weil die Hauptwege in dem Konzentrationslager sind genau angelegt nach den früheren Wanderwegen. Das war eine ganz banale Entscheidung. Da musste man nicht roden und da konnte man sozusagen sich bei der Errichtung des Lagers. Aber dann war das eher so, dass die SS sehr darauf geachtet hat, dass dieses Erholungsgebiet erhalten bleibt und dass sie dann schon, ich glaube, ein Jahr nach der Errichtung des Lagers, ja, das war ein Jahr danach, gab es ein Sommerfest, was die SS ausgerichtet hat für die Weimarer Bevölkerung, was weiter vorn, ungefähr dort, wo heute der Buchenwaldturm steht, stand früher ein Bismarckturm, der dann nach dem Krieg abgetragen wurde. Und dort hat man eben so ein Fest durchgeführt und viele Weimarer, die können sich dann auch erinnern, dass die Lagers oft da oben waren, auch im Winter, weil es gab da diese sogenannten Teufelslöcher, das sind Erdsenken. Dort konnte man schön Schlitten fahren. Und da ist es dann wiederum interessant, dass diese Ausflugsmöglichkeit genommen wurde nach 1945, weil sie sind jetzt Teil der Mahnmalsanlage. Und da kommt dann eher so dieses, und das hat man ja dann in diese Massengräber umgewandelt, weil die jetzt ja innerhalb dieser Mahnmalsanlage als Grabanlagen gekennzeichnet sind. Aber auch noch zu DDR-Zeiten war das ein Ausflugsgebiet. Also es gab dort eine beliebte Waldgaststätte, die heute Teil der Gedenkstätte ist. Dort fanden sehr viele dieser Jugendweihen statt oder eben auch Ausflüge. Und da ist auch immer die Schizophrenie, also dass die Weimarer gern da hochgegangen sind und trotzdem parallel dieser Ort dazu bestand. Also ein wirklicher Widerspruch, dass man ihnen diesen Erholungsort genommen hat, gab es nicht. Der einzige Widerspruch, das ist das, was ich vorhin erklärt hatte, dass sie gesagt haben, wir wollen nicht, dass dieses Lager nach etwas benannt wurde, was für uns wiederum mit Goethe im Zusammenhang steht. Das kam aber auch nur von einem kleinen Teil der Weimarer, eben dieser Kulturelite, die über Goethe wacht. Ja, okay.
I may add a personal experience as a historian working in the mid-1990s in the Buchenwald Memorial Site. There have been many cases that there came some citizens from Weimar doing their picnic in bathing suits in the area, in the commemoration area of mass graves being constructed in the times of socialism and in the whole area of the memorial site. And there have been a lot of discussions between members of the memorial site staff and Weimar people feeling disturbed to do their picnic or their sunbath in the area of the memorial site, which might be some kind of prolongation of these structures.
Okay, thank you very much. There are no more questions. Christoph?
Now I think I wouldn't open a new round now. I think I mentioned quite some questions, unless there is something from the audience or something from our speakers who would like to enhance one or the other aspects. Otherwise, I think we could come to a conclusion. And I would like to thank very much, first of all, of course, our speakers and commentators for the presentations, for making this a very lively event. Thanks for the audience, for your participation, active participation, for your stamina to stay with us for so long, for over 2 hours. And yeah, as Maximilian already said, this won't be the last online event by Dachau Concentration Camp Memorial. Also, Milovan mentioned that there will be tomorrow and the day after will be more discussions on Sejmište and Topovske Šupe in Belgrade. And I think they're also available online, so there will be more opportunities to engage in discussions and talks about this topic. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ja. Dann wünsche ich aus Berlin allen alles Gute in die Risikogebiete.